Hi, my presentation is titled The Mystery of Meaning. This presentation is pitched at secondary teachers. If we go to the first slide, you'll see a copy of the graphic organiser that I've used to illustrate the different stages that take place for us to not just read, but to comprehend what we're reading. And throughout this presentation, I'm actually going to break down this graphic organiser and show you why I've chosen the images I have and how they all interrelate. So if we go to the second slide, the mystery of meaning. So reading's quite complex, and it's something that all of us do automatically and we take it for granted. We read for pleasure, we read because we have to, so think street signs when you're driving, but most importantly, we read for learning. So because reading is something that all of us do automatically, we're not aware overtly of all of the stages and all of the steps, the things that go into helping us to not just read, but understand or comprehend what we're reading. So as you'll note in my graphic organiser, I've used the symbol of a detective. Now, a detective, why have I chosen a detective? Because I think that meaning or comprehending, there's a mystery to it, which is what I'm going to be explaining to you today, is unravel that mystery. Now, I've also chosen a series of images that move right from an atom through to an organ. Again, this strategy was intentional because I want to show that there's a relationship between all of the stages of reading, and there's a hierarchical relationship as well. So you can see that it's moving up the page. One thing goes to another. But I think importantly, and where I want to start with reading, is not just the 5 stages, but I want to talk about what happens even before we get into a classroom. So you'll see my detective, there's a speech bubble above his head. Now the speech bubble there is to show that long before we even start to learn how to read, through explicit instruction, we learn how to decode sounds and words by our exposure to language. And research has shown that our exposure to language and our broad exposure to language is actually a predictor of our later reading abilities. So even though there are 5 key stages, a lot of research argues that there's 6, and it's this pre-reading stage that helps us it actually gives us a head start when we get into the classroom. If we go to the next slide, the atom and the molecule, decoding. Both of these images are coded red because they're both part of the decoding phase of reading. So phonemic awareness and phonemic knowledge are the atom and the cell, so one makes up the other. So as we discussed, prior language is where it all starts, and from here you enter the atom, which is phonemic awareness. So this stage of reading is a really key building block. It's essentially an oral skill or an awareness of sounds. So to use an example, it's an awareness that the sound B in the word bag sounds like ba, not B. So there's a key difference. And this builds into phonemic knowledge, which is where the cell turns into an atom. So the cell becomes more than just its part. So phonemic awareness is where we start to link the sound to the letter, and phonemic knowledge is about explicitly teaching the link between the phonemes, which are the sounds, and the graphemes, which are the letters. If we move on to the next slide, the cell and the tissue. Again, these are coded differently, colour-coded differently, because they're part of the knowledge phase of reading. We've got the building blocks, the decoding, and we're now moving into knowledge. So vocabulary is represented by the blood cells down here in your bottom left, the smaller picture, because the molecules are building into something else. The letters are no longer letters and the sounds are no longer sounds. So vocabulary starts to occur with repeated exposure to words. And it's really important because once students have repeated exposure to words, those words form part of their memory bank, and that frees up the brain for other parts of reading which are necessary to gain the ultimate, which is comprehension. So if a student knows the meaning of the word, they're far more likely to make sense of what they're reading. And then this builds into fluency, which is obviously how fast we read, but it's more than that. It's also understanding some of the other codes in a passage of text. So understanding an exclamation mark and what that means to our reading, and a comma, for example. So a fluent reader in years 6 to 8 should be at about 150 to 180 words per minute. And by the time a student gets to year 9, you would expect a fluent reader to be at about 180 to 200 words a minute. So let's move on to the next slide, the organ, bringing it all together. And this is where the clues of reading merge, everything becomes one. So you can see that I've colour-coded it purple because the red and the blue, the decoding and the knowledge become something else. So comprehension, this is the ultimate stage of reading, I guess, if you like. It's where a reader can adapt their reading style to various forms of texts. So this is about actually reading with purpose. So you'll read for pleasure, or you'll read the ingredients on the back of a cereal box, for example. But comprehension's more than just reading for purpose. In fact, comprehension actually helps us to think strategically, which is a skill that we all need later in life. So fully comprehending a text, that then allows us to make connections, and that's how we start to get the strategy, connections with other parts of our lives. We start to become strategic thinkers. And that's something, as I said, we take up with us once we leave school. So if we move on to the next slide, I'm going to present to you just one strategy that can be used to help students in a secondary environment increase their comprehension of text. So the strategy that I'm going to present is a graphic organiser, and graphic organisers are excellent because they can be used pre-reading, during reading and post-reading. What they do is they provide a visual aid that can be used to enhance understanding. The reason that I like graphic organisers is because they can be used to assist students who are experiencing a learning difficulty, and they're just as useful for students who are not experiencing any learning difficulties. So graphic organisers, they reduce the cognitive processing requirements, and therefore they help a student to retain the knowledge that they're learning. So they can be used, as I said, for many purposes. They can be used to sequence information, or they can be used to summarise information, or they can be used to plot the order of information. What I'm presenting here is a spider map. That's just one form. There's also Venn diagrams, pie charts, story trees, and I'm sure you've all come across at least one form of graphic organiser that can be used. So a spider map, I think, is really useful because it can spread out, and it is primarily used to help students understand information that is not hierarchical in nature. So at the centre is always the main theme or idea, and from there the student, with each little branch of the spider tree, the student connects different themes and ideas. So if you were looking at a character, you're trying to understand a character in a novel, the central circle would be the character's name, and from here the students branch out and they start to list things they know. It could be physical traits about the character, could be connections with other characters. And graphic organisers, spider charts, in fact, any form, it doesn't all have to be written, which is again why it's an excellent tool for students who are experiencing learning difficulties. They could use images, drawings, images cut out of a magazine. So again, it makes them quite a useful strategy that can be used in an inclusive classroom. Now, when I'm introducing a spider map in a classroom, like any form of graphic organiser, explicit instruction is really important. You need to teach the students how to use it and what's expected. You could complete it in pairs, groups, or individually, depending on the students in your class. So I'm going to leave my presentation there. I know it's the end of the day and you're all probably tired and keen to get home. But if anybody has any more questions or would like more information, please see me. And I hope that you've enjoyed my use of medical images and detectives to help uncode the mystery of meaning. Thanks.